Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Is My Testimony podcast. My name is Kim Whitlow. I'm going to be your host for this podcast, and I'm so excited to get this kicked off today. Today, I'm going to just really introduce myself, give you a little bit of backstory about me, and really explain how this podcast came to be about. So, my name is Kim Whitlow again. I am 43 years young. I am a mom of 5. I live with the man of my dreams, Mr. Jonathan Whitlow, in Northwest Illinois, and pretty much grew up in this area my entire life. Now, I grew up about 30 minutes north of here. My dad and mom were farmers, and so I remember them working very hard from the very beginning. But at the same time, my dad was also a pastor. I had 3 older sisters. They were 12, 14, and 15 years older than me. So when I say older sisters, it was more like having 4 moms instead of just one. And so when I was growing up, they had started to move out of the house. But when I was like 4, my dad became a pastor. And I remember, I literally grew up in the church. Like, we went to church on Sunday mornings. We went to church on Sunday nights. We went to prayer meeting on Monday mornings, Hour of Power Tuesday. Wednesday was Wednesday night church. Thursday was like kids club. Saturday morning we cleaned the church, and then Sunday morning we were back at it. Like, we were out the house by 7:30 to be at church. And so I literally grew up in the church, and I grew up with the foundation of faith, though, that I'm so forever grateful for from my parents. They planted that seed, obviously, at a very young age. I grew up knowing that God loved me and I was supposed to love God. I believed that Jesus died on the cross for me and forgave me of my sins, and I was going to get to go to heaven. And I think the thing that I didn't realize growing up in the church was that trials and tribulations were going to be inevitable, no matter what I believed. I knew that God was good. I expected life to be good, but we all know that just because God is good, life can still be hard. And that was a hard thing for me to understand as I started growing up and going through different seasons of my life, even in junior high. I remember just being a little different in junior high and struggling with different things that I'll get into in a different day. But then getting into high school, and the church that we went to didn't have a lot of youth my age. It was a pretty older generation church. And so I joined a youth group at a different church, and a lot of my friends were going there, and got me through a lot of different seasons of my high school life. And then I started working at McDonald's. I was 16, and some of my youth group friends had started working at McDonald's, and so I worked there. And when I graduated, instead of going to college, I decided to just kind of work with McDonald's and move my way out through McDonald's. At 18, I had lost a boyfriend in a motorcycle accident. And I'll get into this later. This is part of a testimony I'll share at a later date. But during that time, I had kind of walked away from God. I didn't understand if God was good, then why would he take this person from me? And I know that we all struggle with that, so that's something for a later date. But I was a teenager, and I pretty much was like, I am done with church for a while. And I walked away for a little bit. I went through some really rough stuff, and at the age of 20, I was partying pretty hard, and at 21, I got pregnant. I got pregnant with my oldest. I call her my little lifesaver, because if it wasn't for her, who knows where I would be today. And again, God can work all things for good. So even though what I was doing wasn't good, he gave me something that completely changed my life. And as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I knew I was supposed to be a mom. I changed everything that I was doing, and it was time to be a mom. Unfortunately, I wasn't married, and so that was just an experience to go have to face my parents and tell them. I did lose my dad at 22 to cancer, and found myself in this situation of life of being in this not so healthy relationship, and losing my dad, and my mom was grieving, and I found myself pregnant again, not married. And so at that time, we made the decision that we should get married. Since we were having kids together, we might as well get married. And I remember getting married in my living room. That is a testimony for another time too. But God is so good and so faithful that he saw me through all of that. I did end up having 3 kids during that marriage. And in that time, there was some DV, domestic violence, and God saw me through all of that. So, again, story for another day, but I ended up getting divorced, was able to get divorced and through that. And later, through McDonald's, met my now husband, who is amazing. and really taught me what it was like to be loved. So, and then after we got married, we were both working at McDonald's and decided that we wanted to expand our family. So we ended up having 2 more kids, and now I'm a mom of 5. So that's great. And God has just really saw me through so many things in that again, I can see his faithfulness and his walking me through everything. He was with me the entire way. Now, after we had more kids, or actually after we got married, we kind of found our way back to church. I had started looking around the area. We had moved to the area that we're in now, and I just really felt like I really wanted to raise my kids in church like my parents were raising me. And so we found this amazing church, and I started helping in the kids ministry, just helping. And after a couple of years, I actually took over the kids ministry, which is so funny because I counted myself out when I first started going. I didn't think that I was qualified. I didn't think that I had the ability to teach in a ministry aspect. And so I was like, nope, I'm just going to be a table leader. I'm just going to be a helper. I don't want any part of this, but God's story, God's plan was completely different. So I led the kids ministry for about 10 years, and I did actually leave McDonald's, and then I worked from home for a while, expanded our family, and am kind of on this journey to figure out what's next right now. And so in all of this, I say this and tell you this because the entire time, my entire life, I've always loved people. I loved people. In high school, I was friends with everybody. I loved people. Working at McDonald's, I loved people. I think that's why I loved it so much. When I worked my way up at McDonald's, I loved my people at McDonald's, actually to the extent where I was told that it became a weakness of mine. I remember a boss right before I left told me, you're too close to your people. But I just cherished my people. I loved that I could see their God-given talents and help pull them out of them, that I could teach them that they were made for more, that they had gifts and skills and knowledge that they could just use and make an impact and influence others. Leadership has always been something that I have been passionate about, and that was just the ability that I had when I was at McDonald's. Now, here we are today. I still want to make an influence and impact on other people. I love people. I cherish relationships with people. But I really have in the last few years found myself stuck, knowing that I wanted to do more, but I wasn't really sure where to start. And I knew that obviously working in ministry, I love the Lord, and we found our way back, and God has been so faithful and so good to us. But I just felt like he had been stirring something up in my heart, and I wasn't really sure what was next. Now, I was on a momcation with a friend, my friend, and we were sitting there talking for a second, and we're talking about some different struggles that she had been going through in life. And she said, it's really cool for you that God can do all that stuff for you, and like pastors and people on TV. But what about us everyday people? When does the everyday miracles happen? And I was like, well, they happen all the time. And she was like, you never hear about it. And I remember thinking to myself, you don't really hear about it. I could sit there and tell you, I could tell you all about my pastor and things that he had gone through and how God had brought him through certain things and even back to life, and just losses that they had and how God had comforted them and walked them through different seasons. But I'm going to be completely honest. When I walked into church the next Sunday and looked around the room with people I had been doing life with for years, I didn't know their story. I knew if they were married, if they had kids, obviously, maybe what area of the church that they served in, where they lived maybe, but I didn't know their God moments. I didn't know what God had walked with them through. I didn't know what God had provided for them. I didn't know those details. And I started to think, I don't know their stories. And so this is when stories became so important and interesting to me, because stories are biblical. This is how Jesus taught, was in stories. This is what makes us relatable. Now, I am a person who loves stories, and I probably love stories a little too much. I probably tell too many stories. I probably talk a little too much at times. I'm the person that will say, long story short, but not really, or long story long, or short story long, or anything of those sorts, because I want to give you all the details, and then I'll try and backtrack and make sure you understand everything that I'm saying. But this is what makes people relatable. This is how you can meet somebody where they're at. And this is how Jesus met so many people where they're at. And so I started thinking about stories and testimonies and how important they were. But I wasn't really sure what God was stirring up in my heart. So after meeting with talking with my friend and realizing that I didn't know any of those stories and having these feelings of wanting to do more and starting to think about how I could make this impact and influence on others and pull stories out of people, I started to pray. And I was like, Lord, I need your wisdom in this situation because I don't really know what you're telling me, and I want to make sure I'm not doing it for my glory, but for yours. And so I remember having a dream. Isn't it funny how when we ask God that he answers us, right? And it might not be when we expect it, and it might not be how we expect it, but I remember having this dream. And in the dream, I was sitting at this table with my friend Tanya. Now, Tanya is somebody that I was going to church with for a very long time. She rocked my babies in the nursery. She had recently gone through some cancer treatments, and we were at this table talking, and it was a wood top table. We both had microphones. I mean, it was even industrial legs. And I remember being in this church setting. I can even feel the temperature of the air, and I can almost smell the smell that was in the room in that area. And then behind me, there was a big banner that said, "This is my testimony." And it was one of those dreams that I woke up so disappointed because I thought it was real. I thought it was so real that I almost had to check to see what was going on. And almost wanted to cry when I realized that it wasn't real, but felt so grateful because there was so much detail in it that I knew that it had to be from God. And so I remember waking up and thinking, a podcast about testimonies. And then I was like, but wait, this is my testimony. That was contradiction to me because my daughter had started an Instagram page called This Is My Testimony, and where she shared her testimony and different things that she had been walking through and kind of highlighting favorite verses and what God was doing in her life. And I was like, maybe that's just what it was about. Maybe that was just me thinking of Raven and the amazing things that she's doing and her testimony and her things that she's sharing with other people and the influence and impact she's having. But it was just so heavy on my heart that I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll talk to her about that and see what she thinks, because I didn't want to steal her thunder. And then I was like, oh, and Tanya. Now, Tanya is someone who is either all in or not at all. And so I was like, I was really nervous to even ask her. But in my head, I knew that she had to be the first person I brought on this podcast. So I remember praying about it. And we do these things, right? We say, Lord, if this is from you, this will happen. We can write the story, even though we know that he's the author and he has the pen. We're saying, okay, Lord. I just kept asking for confirmation, though. So I remember thinking, I'm going to see Tanya and I'm going to ask her, and if she says yes, this is something that I need to do. And I remember seeing Tanya maybe a little bit later. We were at a benefit working, and I remember walking up to her and I was sweating because I was so nervous, because I was like, what if she thinks that I'm crazy, right? What if she thinks this is just so far out there? And I remember looking at her and I was telling her about my dream and what I wanted to do, and that she was my first guest and I wanted her to come on this podcast with me. And there was this long pause, which it probably wasn't a long pause, but to me it was a very long, drawn out pause. To her it was probably 2 seconds. And she looks me in the eye and she says, I'm in, let's do it. And I remember thinking, yes, Lord, thank you for that confirmation. And I was just so excited because I was like, yes, I have this vision. We have this plan. I had talked to Raven. She loved the idea. Let's go for it. And then, it's so funny. As soon as we are obedient, we start walking in the things that the Lord wants us to walk in, the enemy attacks. And so I remember being on this high, yes, I can't wait to do this. And then feeling like, who are you to do a podcast? You don't even know how to set anything up. You don't know what equipment you need. Who wants to listen to you? What stories do you have to tell? You won't even get any guests to come on there. And all of a sudden the enemy just attacked and attacked and attacked. And so I was like, Lord, I'm going to need to pray through this, and I'm going to need some confidence because I am just feeling like I am not capable, right? The cool thing is that even when we're not capable, he is, because he's the one that's in charge. And so this was years ago, and I let years go past, and we had some life happen, and we had some loss in our life, and I was just in a really weird place in life. Didn't really know what I wanted to do at all. Didn't really know who I was. Didn't really know what God had intended for me. I felt a little lost and I felt a little distant. But God is good and He's so great. And He will always pull us back, right? He leaves the 99. And so I was still in the Kids Link ministry, feeling like I was supposed to be doing something else. And I remember going to Pastor John, my pastor, and telling him I needed to step away. And I'd like to do something else, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So in April of 2024, I really kind of took a step back from Kids Link. My friend Allie stepped in, who is amazing. That's a whole nother testimony and prayer that I will tell you about someday. But she stepped in and took over the kids ministry, and I kind of stepped away just from serving at a very high level for a while. I had a daughter that was going off to college. I wanted to be able to take the summer and get her off to college before I committed to anything else. And just kind of take a break and figure out what was next. I remember Allie then called me in the fall. And mind you, at this time, still no podcast, still not doing anything, all talk. I was like, I'm going to do this. And then I wouldn't do anything. And then something would happen. And then I would listen to the enemy and I would get distracted or I would get discouraged. And so in the fall, I got a call from my friend Allie. And she said, hey, the sisters ministry, the women's ministry in our church, is looking to revamp the ministry. We need some fresh ideas. Do you have anything? And I was like, well, actually, yes. My mom and I were talking about a week ago, and she was telling me about this thing that they do, this tea and testimonies that they do in Lena, which is about a half hour from where I live. And they get together once a month and the woman shares her testimony and they have brunch together. And so she said it's been really awesome and they unite and it's so cool to learn things about each other. I said, what if we did that? And she's like, that would be amazing. Let's take it to the sisters and see what they think. So I remember going, we had a church picnic, and I remember sitting down with them and saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I think testimonies would be powerful. We can relate to one another. We can understand what someone's gone through. We can kind of just like form a bond that would be really good for us in this church. And so they were all in. We ended up calling it Battlefield Brunch because obviously, even though we hold the victory, doesn't mean that we don't walk through the battlefield. And so your testimony is really part of that. And so we kicked off the brunch in November of 2024. And I'm happy to say now that today is May of 2025, and we just finished our 7th brunch, and it has been absolutely amazing. Now, the first one, I remember setting it up, praying that people would show up, and we had 22 ladies came that day. And I remember as my friend Jackie was sharing her testimony, feeling this overwhelming presence of God, and like this, like He was resting on my shoulders, and just this like, see, this is what I am showing you. I am showing you that stories are so important, that I have this plan, that I want you to do these things. You have to take action. And I just felt like stories are so important. I just remember looking around the room and looking at people just being impacted and influenced and changed by Jackie sharing her testimony. I'm pretty sure I cried the entire way home from that brunch that day. Just, again, amazing how God never gives up, right? When He has a purpose for you and you try to walk in obedience and things happen, He doesn't give up. He continues to leave the 99 to come after us. And so we've been having a brunch every single month. Now, when we first started this brunch, I would go to ladies and say, do you have a testimony to share? Do you have a testimony to share? And I remember most of them said, I don't have a story. I remember them saying my story is not very special. And this was also confirmation because I realized that I was supposed to teach people how their story is important, that how they could make an impact, that what they walked through and what they have been through isn't just for them, that their testimony really is for other people. And so we have been meeting and gathering, and as more people have shared their testimonies, it has been so amazing because now people are like, wow, I do have a testimony. I do have a story. I do have something to share. God has worked in my life. And now I always tease everybody, we have so many people lined up to do testimonies that we'll be having brunch until 2030 because so that way everybody can share their testimony, because so many people are excited to say, yes, God has done that in my life. This is what He's doing in my life, or this is when life was really hard, but this is what he brought me through. And so in all of that, in all of those experiences, I just felt like God has been just smiling down on us and this whole experience and really pushing this forward. So this is where this podcast has come from. We are going to get on here and we're going to share the hard, but the good of God. We're going to share what we've walked through. We're going to share what has hurt, what has made us angry, what has made us happy, what God has provided, and maybe a prayer that hasn't been answered yet, but we're still waiting and trusting. And so in all of that, this is a safe place. God has showed me how important it is to have a place for people to share their story, to have a platform to talk on, to be able to express how good he is and how faithful he has been. So after dragging my feet for all of these times, here we are. This is my testimony. This is this podcast. I am so very happy that you are here, that you are listening, that you're with me on this. I can't wait to be able to share more of my life experience and what God is doing. But I'm more excited for you to hear from guests that I will have on, from people who have walked through things that have forever changed their life, and now they get to share their story and make an impact on other people. So again, I'm so very, very happy that you are here. I want you to remember that your story is important. Whatever you are walking through today, even though it hurts or it's hard or it is not fun, that I pray that you trust in God, that he will bring you through and realize the impact that you can have on others as you walk through your story. Just remember, it's your story, but it's for his glory. Thanks, guys.